good to have you with us on Facebook this morning. Once again, just a reminder, if you have anybody, like one of you have said to me, I've got someone I would like to listen to the gospel threads that we did, someone who needs to hear that, or you think they would want to hear that, and they're not a friend of mine on Facebook, which is what you pretty much have to be unless you share it yourself. You can share it to your friends. But K.W. Braden, search K.W. Braden on YouTube. You will find my YouTube channel, and these things are available starting with our turn of the year. Right around January is as far back as we're going to go putting them on Facebook. So the Revelation study won't be on there. Of course, we didn't record all the Revelation study anyway, but Philippians won't be on there, but that's just too much to ask. It takes 30 minutes every time she downloads a video from Facebook to put it on YouTube. So we said just stop at January. So January, starting with our study of the Holy Spirit, and then moving into spiritual gifts, and then gospel threads, and now what we've been doing. I hope you all been doing your reading this week. Again, I'm not going to call you out and ask for you to raise hands on who's been doing it. That's between you and God. And I've got something I'll say about that later today, but I hope you've been doing it. It's been enjoyable. I noticed we didn't pick a really good time to begin this reading plan as we move into 1 Chronicles with 9 straight chapters of genealogies. Makes it kind of difficult, but and the names are hard and so forth. So we, as a reminder, Peg put it out there for y'all to see it, that you can listen to it as well and follow along if you would like to do it that way. I told her I found myself spending more time in these chapters than I anticipated I would. I thought I would just kind of go through them, but I found myself stopping and highlighting and making notes, because in that first couple chapters of Chronicles, you learn about where the Midianites came from, the Edomites, the Hittites, the Philistines, the Mosquitobites. You find out all those things as you're in there. The Gesundtites. So I found myself spending more time there. But as we study and as we get started today, I want to tell y'all what I've got planned for you. Saturday, this coming week, we are all going to run a marathon together.
Running like
physically running. We are all of you watching on Facebook, you're going to do it where you are. We are all going to run a marathon together coming this coming Saturday. How's that sound?
I'm sure I have something.
No, there is no. There is no getting out of it. There is no getting, whether you're sick, whether your toenail hurts, whether you're out of town, it doesn't matter. We are all going to run a marathon together this coming Saturday.
Okay.
All right?
I hope it's a reading.
So I want you to consider that. It's happening. You have to do it. I'll even give you a little more time. Let's say I said this next Saturday next year, we are all running a marathon together.
I will run right behind you.
You're not getting out of it. It's coming.
It actually works out.
No.
Okay, you understand what I'm saying? It's going to happen. You have to do it. So what are you going to do starting today to prepare for that next year?
Start eating more.
I'm going to start.
There's a lot you're going to start, right?
I'm going to continue my defluffing and start
Continue defluffing. Okay, you're going to train your body to be ready. You're going to start doing things and make preparation for what is coming next year. Sometimes, though, we don't know what's coming. Sometimes things happen and we have to be prepared for them. But I find in my own life, Draper laughs at me because when I was doing the seminar work for this PhD I'm working on, it's every semester I had classes and I had assignments, and he could tell when it was getting down to the wire because my door would close, my blinds would shut, and then he would notice the stacks of books would change positions. This is the stack I haven't finished. This is the stack I have finished. It starts off with a big stack here and none here, and then as he comes in later, they start moving over, right? So he noticed that as time got closer, I felt the pressure and I began to prepare. But again, I had a deadline. I knew when it was coming. You realize tomorrow begins today. Think about that. Tomorrow begins today. In our reading this week, we finished up Second Kings, went straight into First Chronicles, and we've done several of the Psalms this week. But as I studied, I told Peg I got stuck on Josiah. He's in Second Kings. And believe it or not, even though I got stuck on Josiah, our lesson today is not about Josiah. Because as I was reading Josiah, it said that there is no king before him like him and none after him either. And I thought, wait a minute. Josiah had a great-great-grandfather named Hezekiah. And Hezekiah was known as a really good king of Judah. So these things that Josiah did, Josiah reinstitutes temple worship. And I'm thinking, well, how long had it been? Because Hezekiah had just done that too. So how long had it been? And basically it had been somewhere around a lot longer than I thought. Because I don't have the thing written down. But it had been a while since that. And he reinstituted the Passover. And it said there had not been a Passover celebrated in Judah like this one since the days of Solomon. I don't know if you caught that while you read it. But he said it had since the days of Solomon. Well, how long was that? That was somewhere in the vicinity between 255 and 300 years between Solomon and Josiah. And they had not had a Passover like that. I said, but Hezekiah, he did the Passover. So I went back and I started reading, and I found myself reading the chapters on Hezekiah a little closer than I had previously. And I started looking at them really, really close. And here's some things I noticed. Hezekiah, he did reinstitute the Passover. And I thought, wait a minute. If it hadn't been done since Solomon, and that's 255 years since Solomon, and the Passover was the feast for the Israelites. I mean, that was it. It all began and ended with the Passover, right? They were supposed to do that. In fact, they celebrated the Passover in their first month of their calendar year on the 18th day. And that was what was key. See, Hezekiah, he didn't get the temple cleansed and the Levites ready to hold the Passover until it was ready to be done in the second month. So they did a Passover, but it wasn't at the correct time. So then Josiah comes in, and eventually he does it, and he reinstitutes it normal. And how about this? Josiah is out, and he sends them to clean up the temple and to get rid of the things in the temple that don't belong. And the high priest Hilkiah, daggum.
Just say something. We won't know.
Hilkiah, thank you. Hilkiah, the high priest. Just say you don't know any different. Hilkiah is brought a book that was found. Think about this now. Hilkiah is brought a book by the people cleaning out the temple that is found in the temple. And do you remember what that book was? It was the book of the law. It was God's word. It had been, for lack of a better word, lost. And the people hadn't been following it. And we're still going to get back to Hezekiah, but I just got to share some of these things from Josiah. When he had the book of the law read to him, it scared him to death. Because I'm sure as they read through Deuteronomy, which we're going to spend some time there again today ourselves, and it says basically, live my way or else. I'm sure he realized they hadn't been living his way. And it says he tore his robes and he went in and he basically said, and here's the amazing thing. What you may not know is when the kingdom was set up, the kings had certain things that they were supposed to all do. One thing they were supposed to do is handwrite for themselves a copy of the law. Who knows when the last king was who did that? Was it David? We don't know. But we know that the law had been lost. So it got me looking back at Hezekiah. So I was studying him for a little bit, and there's some things I learned from him. I learned that we need to plan ahead. We need to also respond correctly. And you cannot plan ahead unless you know what you're trying to plan and what you're planning for and what the process is. And you cannot respond correctly unless you have planned ahead. Does that make sense? And there's a couple things in there, we're going to look at. But first off, I want us to see that Hezekiah realized when you are planning ahead that you have to follow God's plan. Look at 2 Kings chapter 18. We're going to begin there today. 2 Kings, and we're going to spend time in two different chapters here, 18 and 19. We're going to go to Deuteronomy if you want to hold your finger there. We're going to end up in Matthew and John. We're going to be all over the place, and you don't feel like you have to follow us everywhere we go, but we're going to be around for a little bit. But basically, here's what we learned from Hezekiah about Hezekiah's life. 2 Kings chapter 18, beginning in verse 1. In the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he began to reign. Now that's actually an old man compared to Josiah. Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign. Right? And another king was 7 years old when he began to reign. But Hezekiah was 25 years old, and he reigned for 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah. Listen to this, verse 3. And he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, according to all that David his father had done. Anytime you hear a king referred to as his father David had done, and it's so far down the line like Hezekiah was, Hezekiah's, more than 300 years removed from King David. Well, his father before him had not lived appropriately according to what God had said to do. So they take it back to he did what his father David had told him had done. But listen to what it says. He removed the high places and broke the pillars and cut down the Asherah. And he broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made. For until those days the people of Israel had made offerings to it. It was called Nehushtan. Now, had you forgotten about the bronze serpent that Moses had made? I had forgotten about it. I mean, we're talking 400 years or 500 years ago. I didn't realize it was still around. Apparently it was around, and now it was being used improperly. He trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel, so that there was none like him among all the kings of Judah after him, nor among those who were before him. For he held fast to the Lord. He did not depart from following him, but kept the commandments that the Lord commanded Moses. And the Lord was with him. Wherever he went out, he prospered. He rebelled against the king of Assyria. King of Assyria is the powerhouse of the day, all right? So he rebelled against king of Assyria and would not serve him. He struck down the Philistines as far as Gaza and its territory, from watchtower to fortified city. He was a good king. If you look back at other kings of Judah before him, kings that had done right in the eyes of the Lord, who had done right in his sight, it'll often say something to the effect like it does for Jotham. It says, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord according to all that his father Uzziah had done. Nevertheless, shows up a lot. Nevertheless, the high places were not removed. You see, they had taken, the people of Judah, the people of Israel had taken these customs of these other peoples who were around them, and they had begun to worship God in that way as well. They had added to their worship of God. They had let the culture infiltrate their pure worship of who God was. They were no longer worshiping him only in Jerusalem and sacrificing only in Jerusalem like they were supposed to. And king after king after king, though they wanted to do what was right, it would say, nevertheless, they didn't get rid of that worship. What would happen today if you had a Hindu friend, let's say, someone who's who studied and followed the ways of the Hindi, and they came to a saving knowledge of Jesus, and they looked at you and said, I'm just going to add Jesus and his worship into what I already do. What would your response to that be?
No, that won't work.
That won't work. That's right. Because our God is a jealous God, it tells us, and he doesn't want you don't want you to worship any other God other than himself. In fact, there's commandments about that, right? The first couple, I am the Lord your God, you should have no other God before me, right? And don't make yourself any graven image. In fact, the first 4 of the 10 commandments are about how we worship God. You can't do that. Corinthians, if you read read the letter Paul wrote to the Corinthians, so much of 1st and 2nd Corinthians is discussing the fact that they were taking the cultures of their day and letting that infiltrate the way they worship God. It doesn't work that way. We're going to find out later it had infiltrated and been a part of their worship for so long that the foreigners around them thought that the high places belonged to Yahweh. What? I mean, that's not right. But we have to follow. Hezekiah realized we had to follow God's plan. It had been God's plan for the nation of Israel from the very beginning. From the time they left Egypt and they moved into the promised land, the land of the Canaanites. You remember right in there is where we get a lot of the really emphasis on the fact that his name is Yahweh. And that you are going to follow Yahweh, not the gods of Egypt that you've left, not the gods of Canaan where we're headed. You are to follow him and him alone. In fact, Joshua, the protege of Moses, who led the people to the conquest of the land through the book of Joshua, he even reminds the people in Joshua chapter 24, verse 15, you need to choose. Who are you going to follow? Are you going to follow these other gods, or are you going to follow Yahweh? And he says, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. Right? Now, if you go back and you watch the 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston, and because he's the only Moses we all know, they mess up in that movie, and they had Moses saying that. But it's Joshua who says it toward the end of his book. You choose who you're going to serve. And why was that important? Why is it important for us can't we just halfway follow God? Isn't it just better to serve him a little than to serve him none at all? No, it's not. In fact, in Deuteronomy chapter 30, Moses is speaking, and here's what he says. He says, verse 19, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life, that you and your offspring may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice, and holding fast to him. For he is your life and length of days, that you may dwell in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give to them. He says, choose life. I'm setting before you today a blessing and a curse. You choose life. Don't choose the curse. How do you choose life? Yes, ma'am.
Deuteronomy what?
Deuteronomy 30, starting in verse 19. How do you choose life? He said, choose life. What was the answer for how to do that?
Follow the commandments.
Follow the commandments that he had spoke to them, that God had told him to speak to him. What were specifically those commandments? If you flip over to Deuteronomy chapter 6, starting in verse 1, here's what Moses had commanded them. Now this is the commandment, the statutes, and the rules that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you. Okay? He's laying it out. And he's going to start in this particular sermon of his. He's just finished reminding them what the 10 Commandments were in chapter 5. Now he's in chapter 6. Deuteronomy is basically Moses' last 3 sermons to the people before he dies. And so he's reminding them right here, starting in chapter 6, he's going to summarize it, but then it's going to be expanded upon as he moves forward from here. He says, "This is the commandment, the statutes, and the rules that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land to which you are going over to possess it, that you may fear the Lord your God, you and your son and your son's son." Okay, so that's very applicable to what we're studying in the book of Kings, right? Because you have the son, and then the son's son, and the son after that, and the son after that, and it's basically saying you need to be doing it for you and your son because he needs to do it for his son, and it goes both ways. If you don't follow me, neither will he. And it begins a generation after generation of curses because you're not following me correctly. You, your son's sons, by keeping all his statutes and his commandments, which I command you all the days of your life, and that your days may be long. He didn't say keep the ones that make you feel better. He didn't say keep the ones that are easy. He didn't say keep the ones that are the ones that you agree with. The ones that already fit into your life. He said keep all of them. And even for us, we're a New Testament church. We are saved by grace. We don't follow the commands and the customs of the Israelite people. Okay? We are not just a sect off of Judaism. Okay? We are Christians. Judaism shows us how we got here. Okay? So we're not called to keep all the commands as the Israelites had been called that were found in the Old Testament. We are found to do something else. Well, he goes on and he says, "Hear therefore, O Israel," in verse 3, "and be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, as the Lord," wait a minute, let's say that differently. "As Yahweh, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey." Thank you. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in the house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise." He says, love the Lord your God. Love Yahweh your God with everything in you. All of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Everything that is you follows him. You can't compartmentalize your life. You can't say, well, that's my spiritual life, this is my secular life. That's my church life, that's my work life. It doesn't. My favorite one is, this is me outside the game of Survivor, and this is me in Survivor, where it's okay to lie, cheat, and steal. Either you are a follower of Jesus or you're not. Either you are going to give him all you have or you're not. It's binary. It's all or nothing. Okay? Don't fall under the trap and the disguise of it's better to give God a little than nothing at all. There is nowhere in Scripture that says that. He says you need to follow all his commands. You need to teach them. Did you hear when he says you need to be talking about them? All the time. Basically, all the time.
Every time you're awake.
When you're walking in and out of the house, when you're with your people, when you're with other people, it doesn't matter what's going on. You should be talking about what God has done in your life. We struggle with that. For some reason, we will talk about the blessing we have received without talking about the one who gave us the blessing. Right? We've got to stop that. We've got to talk about who he is and what he has done for us. Jesus spoke about this same thing in Matthew chapter 22 when he was being questioned by the Pharisees as to which one was the best commandment, which one was the greatest. They're trying to trap him. Because if Jesus would have picked one of the 10, they would have found a reason to condemn him for not saying it was another one of the 10. So Jesus fooled them all. And he got past Deuteronomy 5 and Exodus 20, and he went Deuteronomy 6 on them and said, it's to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Oh, by the way, just so you know, the second one's just like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. So if you take all of the law, if you take all the principles of God Jesus tells us that all of it, the law and the prophets, fall under these two categories. Everything hinges on loving God with everything within you and loving your neighbor as yourself. Are we properly doing that? Are you literally loving God with everything within you if you have a bad attitude about a brother or sister in Christ? No. You cannot love God with all that is within you while you're hating a brother or sister, or while you're holding something against them. If you're not loving your neighbor as yourself, then you're not loving God with all that's within you. That's the planning ahead. That's the knowing all the commands. That is knowing we need to plan ahead, and Hezekiah knew that they had to know what the commandments of God were so that they would be able to live that way. All the Israelites, they crossed over from the wilderness into the promised land, right? They crossed over the Jordan. Well, we ourselves, according to John chapter 5, verse 24, it says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life. He does not come into judgment, but has passed from death to life." Another translation says he has crossed over from death to life. We have crossed our own Jordan. We are in a place that we have crossed from our spiritual deadness in the wilderness. We have crossed our Jordan into our promised land of being more like Jesus and following him and doing what he's asked us to do. He has asked us to follow his commands. He's asked us to teach others his commands. He's asked us to love the Lord our God with all that is within us and to love our neighbor as ourselves. That is what we are called to do. From the time we decided to put our trust in Jesus and follow him, we crossed over from living our own wants and desires, and now we live for God's desires. 1 John chapter 3, verse 14. 1 John 3:14, if you just want to write this down, it says, if I can find it, "We know that we have passed out of death into life because we love the brothers. Whoever does not love abides in death." How do you know that you're following Jesus? How do you know you love God with everything within you? How are you treating your relationships around you? How are you treating those who are in the same proximity as you? Hezekiah teaches us out of 2 Kings 18 that we need to be people who are planning ahead and being willing to do the training we need to do to be ready for whatever comes our way. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. Why does it say, we know, because we love the brothers? Is the brothers the Christians?
Yes.
But when you love your neighbor, it's not the Christians.
Right.
It's everybody.
It's everybody. So it's your relationship, how you treat people. But in the letter of 1 John, he is writing about a relationship with one another. Okay.
But there's really no difference.
There really is no difference. There's a little bit of difference here and there. Okay. But as far as some people fall into a trap of just because someone is in, I gotta be careful how I say this.
Sorry.
That's okay. We are not called to meet every need around us. If you know this person is going to take what you give them and use it for ill, you're not called to help them with that. A lot of the folks who come into the church here looking for help, they'll try to throw in my face in particular, because I'm usually the one telling them no. That the church is supposed to help everybody. Well, we're not called to help everybody.
Right.
But we are called to be a community of believers that helps one another. That's why, for example, I try to do the clothes swap. Because in my that just as an illustration, in my estimation, that is what the church in Acts looked like. They pulled together their resources, and instead of us all having to go out and buy our kids who just outgrew their clothes after 4 months, instead of having to, they're not hurt,
Right.
Instead of selling them for consignment to make a profit, why don't we all come together and pool our resources and help one another out? It's not quite taken off ever to the point where I've wanted to get it, but it still helps 20 to 24 families each time we do it. They come and take part in it. You love your neighbor as yourself is talking about how we respond. We just treat everybody with the respect and the love and everything we desire. Showing love to the brothers But you know, Kelly, if we go a step further, we're often more cruel to our own family members than we are to strangers on the street. And we know how to push each other's buttons, right?
Sometimes it's hard to love.
Sometimes it's hard to love.
Your family
That's right.
members and your
And we're all family members.
Right.
We're all part of
In here.
We're a part of a family. And the truth be told, sometimes it's hard to love y'all.
Aw.
But you know what?
Because you love us.
But not you all. Not you all. You know,
You've had other laughs.
it's other people outside this room, you know. No, but sometimes it's hard to love one another because part of the reason is, how about this? And this is a little off the subject, but not completely. Part of the reason is we expect more out of one another. So when you don't live up to what we expect, and we expect it because that's what God calls us to, how He calls us to live, so it hurts more when we don't live the way God has called us to live, right? I got to get going because we got a lot to cover. But now we have to decide. We know that we got to follow God's plan. If you're not being blessed, don't expect God's blessings if you're not willing to do it His way. Okay. Don't expect God's blessings in any area of your life if you're not willing to do that area of your life His way. And it may even flow over to other areas of your life. If you've got sin going on over here, you're not going to be blessed over here. Does that make sense? Okay. And we said last week, we talked about what we have to redefine, maybe what we call blessings. Blessings isn't financial wealth. I mean, it is. But just because you're living for God doesn't mean He's going to help your bank account be overflowing. But if you are living for God, you're going to have peace when the bank account isn't. Right? Peace was what we talked about last week. So anyway, we gotta learn like Hezekiah. We have to anchor our trust. As the story unfolds, basically Assyria is now with the king Sennacherib. I love that name. You should use it anytime you have somebody being born. Sennacherib is the king of Assyria, and he is Reagan. So he is coming in against the Judahites, all right, and he is already sieging what is supposed to be their fortified cities. So as you read down through 18, you'll see that's going on. And Hezekiah's way of handling this is to first try to negotiate. So he sends message to the king, and he says, "What can I do to make you go away?" And he said, "Well, send us this much money." And so Hezekiah gathers up the money and the gold, and basically to get enough gold, he even strips the gold plating out of the temple to be able to get enough to pay him off. So he pays him off, and just like any bad guy in a movie that you've watched, he reneges on it. And he says, "That's still not good enough. I'm not going to go away. I'm still coming after Jerusalem." Okay? So that's where we are. That's what has happened. So then you have these three officials from Assyria come to the walls of Jerusalem, and three officials from Jerusalem come out to meet them. Neither of the kings are present. These are the spokespeople. In fact, the one you hear the most of he's called the Rabshakeh. The Rabshakeh is actually he's the chief cupbearer of the king of Assyria. And you're saying, why would you send your cupbearer? And that's really unusual. But the reason they think he did, and we find out throughout here, that he is able to speak Hebrew. So he is speaking to them in their own tongue. And there's one point where they're saying, well, we don't want you speak to us in your language, because we don't want the people on the wall to hear what you're saying. And they go, well, I'm going to speak in Hebrew because I want them to hear that you're deceiving them, and that they're going to fall because you're not going to do what the great king of Assyria says you should do. Y'all with me so far? Okay, good. So then they come together and they have this conversation. And here is what starting in verse 19, here is what the Rabshakeh, or whatever his name is, says to these people that send back to King Hezekiah. "Say to Hezekiah, thus says the great king, the king of Assyria, what do you rest this trust of yours?" On what? Not on. On what do you rest this trust of yours? Trust? So where's his trust anchored, in other words? Do you think that mere words are strategy and power for war? Do you think your negotiating skills, your own abilities, do you trust in your own abilities when struggles come up in your life? Is that where your trust is? Is your trust in your own way to talk yourself out of trouble? That's why he's asking Hezekiah. Then he says, in whom do you now trust that you have rebelled against me? Behold, you are trusting now in Egypt, that broken reed of a staff which will pierce the hand of any man who leans on it. Such is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who trust in him. Egypt used to be the powerhouse, right? There is an alliance between Egypt and Judah. The king of Assyria is saying, are you sure you need to be trusting the Egyptian Pharaoh? Because what his analogy there, he's a broken reed of a staff that will pierce anyone who leans on it. In other words, he's out for himself. He's going to backstab you. Are you trusting in him? Do we trust in our political affiliations? What's your trust for your life? Do you think the government's going to help you out? Or is God the one that you put your trust in? You think the Republicans or the Democrats have the answers for your life? Let me tell you right offhand, no. They don't. Only God does. So he said, so first, are you trusting in your own abilities? Are you trusting in your political affiliations in your government? Then he says in verse 22, but if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and altars Hezekiah has removed, saying to Judah and to Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar in Jerusalem? So remember we said it earlier. They have been following the cultures and the customs of their other gods, adding the worship of Yahweh to that for so long. Even the Assyrians thought that the high places that Hezekiah had torn down was Yahweh's. Okay. Now he's also going to move on here in a minute and say and let him know that. That Yahweh is the one who has sent him. Okay? You got to understand that these spokesmen for the king of Assyria, they've only served false gods. So anytime they stood before people and said their God has told them to do something, they have made it up on the spot. Right? It's kind of like statistics. 78.6% of all stats are made up on the spot, including the 78.6 I just threw out there today. Right? Right. So they are used to standing up and saying, so what would be the difference? If Yahweh was false, how would Hezekiah know that what they're saying Yahweh said isn't true? You with me? You see there? So he's saying, did you not know? He has sent me to do this to you, to this city, because you did that to his high places? And Hezekiah right there went, and nah. Now you're definitely talking out of the wrong end of your mouth, right? Because that is not at all the way our God works. So he's being brought. Hezekiah is being brought face to face with a decision to make, and he's got to decide where is his trust. Is he trusting in his own abilities? Is he trusting in his own government and his own political affiliations? Or is he trusting in God, and it's the God that he knows, not the God this spokesman for the Assyrian king knows? Right? He doesn't really know Yahweh. Okay? So he moves on, and basically verses 22 through 45 through 25 is where we get that. So now Hezekiah has to make a response. How is he going to respond? You are going to be faced with, as we started at the very beginning, for those of you who weren't in here, I said this time next year we're all running a marathon together. And you can't get out of it. So you've got to do whatever you have to do to get ready for that. But now, what about those things that show up that you didn't know was coming? Now, Hezekiah's had a couple days warning or a few months warning knowing what was going on. But things, if we haven't prepared ourselves ahead of time, if we show up and find ourselves in a sticky situation, where will we find our answer? How will you respond? Will you respond with the way you happen to feel that day? Will you respond with your own abilities? Will you respond with a trust of someone other than God? Or are you doing the work ahead of time now so that when it gets here, you know how to respond? Hezekiah shows us how to respond. Just moving to chapter 19, we read in verse 1, as soon as King Hezekiah heard it, he tore his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth and went into the house of the Lord. Hezekiah's first response was to go to God and to the house of the Lord. Now, a lot of us, if we're living outside the favor of God because we have made decisions that have left us in a place of not receiving God's blessing, in fact, we are now receiving the discipline of God, and life isn't going the way we want it to go, our number one tendency is to run away from the house of God. We don't want to be here to be reminded and convicted of the way that we're living, because apparently at this moment we're not willing to give up that lifestyle. We're not willing to give up that sin. We're not willing to repent yet, so we don't want to be reminded of what we're doing. But Hezekiah shows us we got to run to the house of God. He also shows us in verses 2 through 6 that we need to inquire of God's people. And he sent Eliakim, who was over the household, and Shebna, the secretary, and the senior priests, covered with sackcloth, to the prophet Isaiah, the son of Amoz. That is the Isaiah you know. Okay? He was prophesying at this time in the land. They said to him, thus says Hezekiah, this day is a day of distress, of rebuke, and of disgrace. Children have come to the point of birth, and there is no strength to bring them forth. It may be that the Lord your God heard all the words of the Rabshakeh, whom his master, the king of Assyria, has sent to mock the living God, and will rebuke the words that the Lord your God has heard. Therefore, lift up your prayer for the remnant that is left. When the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah, Isaiah said to them, say to your master, thus says the Lord, do not be afraid, because the words that you have heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have reviled me. Behold, I will put a spirit in him so that he shall hear a rumor and return to his own land, and I will make him fall by the sword in his own land. Hezekiah approached the people of God. He went to Isaiah. You know, we might say he came to the house of God to hear the word from the man of God. Well, actually, the man of God, Isaiah, wasn't at the temple. Isaiah was elsewhere. He sent people out to inquire of him. So it would be like you all, if you're having an issue, you come to one another looking for advice. You go to the godly folks that you know. You don't go to the people that you know don't follow God. You don't go to people that you know are going to tell you just what you want to hear. You're going to go to the folks that you know are going to follow God and are going to give you a word from God. So he goes to Isaiah. Hezekiah went to the house of God. He inquired of the people of God, but he also prayed to God. He did his own prayer time. In fact, you read, when you get to verse 14, it begins a time where he is praying, and he prays in verse 15, O Lord, the God of Israel, who is enthroned above the cherubim, you are the God, you alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see, and hear the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to mock the living God. Truly, O Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste the nations and their lands, and have cast their gods into the fire. So basically, he's saying, my fear right now is warranted. The Assyrians have done what they say they're going to do. They're not making it up. They're not just talking big. It's for real. He says, and they have cast their gods into the fire, for they were not gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore, they were destroyed. And basically, he's saying, but you're not one of them. You are God. You are Yahweh our God. So now, Yahweh our God, save us, please, from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you, O Lord, are God alone. The spokesman and the king of Assyria walked into a situation they knew nothing about. And they're trying their old ways. What they don't know is Hezekiah knows Yahweh. Hezekiah speaks to Yahweh. Hezekiah has a relationship with Yahweh. He's not a king of the past. He's done his homework. He's ready to go. You're going to be faced with trial after trial after trial. You're going to be faced with choice after choice after choice. And to use the phrase that that I actually talk against every once in a while, the enemy is going to come after you. You are going to be faced with things, but the difference is he doesn't know your king the way you do. He doesn't know the way that he has helped you out. Keep in mind, Satan is not all-knowing. We act like he is. But he is not omnipresent. He's not everywhere all the time. He doesn't know the end of the story. He doesn't necessarily know everything God's done in your life that you can fall back on as a remembrance to know, look what God's led me to so far. He doesn't know the promises God has made for you that you have held on to and that he has made come to fruition in your life. And because he doesn't know that, he also doesn't know that you know where to go get a word from the Lord. He may not know that you have already received such a word when he comes against you. Hezekiah gets a word from the Lord. Yahweh speaks to him and gives him his answer. Notice it didn't come through Isaiah the prophet. Let me take that back. Yes, it did. It did come from Isaiah the prophet. But it was still a word. Huh?
You confused me because
Yeah, it did come from Isaiah. Starting in verse 20, it did come from Isaiah, but he's speaking to Isaiah to say this to Hezekiah directly. And he basically is saying, I've heard you. Listen to starting verse 21. This is the word that the Lord has spoken concerning him. Talks concerning this Hezekiah prayer, his relationship with Sennacherib, the Assyrian king. She despises you. She scorns you, the virgin daughter of Zion. She wags her head behind you, the daughter of Jerusalem. So he's saying to Sennacherib, my people are rebelling against you. Whom have you mocked and reviled? Against whom have you raised your voice and lifted your eyes to the heights? He hasn't mocked Isaiah. He hasn't mocked Hezekiah. He hasn't mocked the children of Israel. Who has he mocked? He says, against the Holy One of Israel. By your messengers you have mocked the Lord, and you have said, with my many chariots I have gone up the heights of the mountains, to the far recesses of Lebanon. I felled its tallest cedars, its choicest cypresses. I entered the farthest lodging place, its most fruitful forest. I dug wells and drank foreign waters, and I dried up with the sole of my foot all the streams of Egypt. So he's saying, this is what you say of yourself. This is what you said you're able to accomplish. But listen to this. Have you not heard that I determined it long ago? I planned from days of old what now I bring to pass, that you should turn fortified cities into heaps of ruins, while their inhabitants, shorn off strength, are displayed and confounded, and have become like plants of the field, and like tender grass, like grass on the housetops, blighted before it is grown. Have you not heard that this was my plan? You silly king of Assyria, you're just my servant. You're doing exactly what I've called you to do. This was my plan that you're carrying out. It was my people that needed discipline, and I'm using you to do it. So what does that tell us? The next time something is happening against you, the truth be told, it was happening against the children of Judah. They were being besieged by the Assyrians. They were being fought against, and war was brought against them. Did it catch their king? Did it catch their true king, their God, offhand? No. He knew it was coming. In fact, it was his plan. They needed to be taught some lessons, and he was using them. And instead of the Assyrian king being able to hold that up and say and boast in what he's done, he's saying, you're just doing what I wanted you to do. But I know you're sitting down and you're going out and coming in and you're raging against me because you have raged against me, and your complacency has come into my ears. I will put a hook in your nose and my bit in your mouth, and I will turn you back on the way by which you came. Make no mistake, God is in control. So God makes a promise to Hezekiah. He tells him that they won't come against Jerusalem. Not a single arrow will be fired in there. He will take care of the situation. And he says in verse 32, therefore thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into the city, or shoot an arrow there, or come before it with a shield, or cast up a siege mound against it. By the way he came, By the same he shall return, and he shall not come into this city, declares the Lord, for I will defend this city to save it for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David. And it tells us in the next verse that the angel of the Lord entered the Assyrian camp and killed 185,000 Assyrians. God, when he's in your corner, that's all you need. And he's in all of our corners when we're following him. There is nothing life can throw at us that he's not prepared for. Maybe you're not prepared for it, but he's ready. I have no doubt. I'm not going to test God with this because, he hasn't told me he's to do this, so I'm not going to test him. But I have no doubt if all of us needed to go out and run a marathon on Saturday, through his power, we could get it done. Okay? There is no doubt. But why do we test him like that? Why don't we stay prepared ahead of time? Why aren't we doing the work? Your preparation for tomorrow and its trials and issues, it begins today. You do the work of study and learning and committing yourself to the principles of God today, so that you are ready to face whatever tomorrow brings. If you wait until you are faced with the decisions you must make, if you have not prepared yourself, there's a very good chance you will put your trust somewhere other than in God. I say to you today, as Joshua said many, many years ago, choose today whom you will serve. Choose today whom you will trust. Choose today how you will prepare, because tomorrow is coming. Now, we've given a very easy method of preparation. Don't get nervous sitting there. I'm not going to ask who is taking part in our daily Bible reading. But we've given you the reasonings and the whys for it. We've told you not only does God tell us to do that, but all the research shows that simple daily Bible reading is one of the most important things to do, so we can grow and be more like him. And since I don't know, okay, let me re-emphasize that. Since I don't know who is taking part in this and who is not, I feel safe making this next statement to you. I don't know what to do with a Christian who says they're a follower of Jesus, who says they want to be more like him, who says they want to grow in their relationship with him, who is not willing to read their Bible. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what to do with somebody who says they want to be more like Jesus, who says they want a stronger relationship with him, who says they want to do life God's way, who is not willing to be disciplined in the spiritual matters. Thankfully, it's not my job to know what to do with them. The Holy Spirit will deal with that, right?
And your job to pray for them?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now you know what to do.
There you go.
I
But,
have a question, another one.
uh-oh.
What are y'all going by? 'Cause I have my own little daily Bible.
We'll talk about that more in just a minute.
Okay.
But whether and it doesn't mean you have to be going by mine or the one I've put out there. But I know I have spoken with individual folks who have made it clear they are comfortable where they are in their relationship with Jesus. Now, those people are not in this room, okay? But I know those people exist, and I just don't know how to respond to that. You want to be more like Jesus, but you're not willing to do what it takes to be more like him. You all know people who say, I want to be better in this area of my life, and they talk about it all the time, but they don't do what they know they need to do to be better there, right? Whether it's losing weight, whether it's being healthier in this other, whatever. You pick the situation, and after a while, you know how you respond to that when you hear it again and again. You just kind of you don't even give it any attention, right? Because they say they want it, but they don't not willing to do what's necessary to do it. I pray that's not us. I pray that we are willing to be more like Jesus, and to be more like Jesus, we're not only willing to grow, we're committed to grow. Okay? So that's our lesson for today. Those of you on Facebook, it's good to have you with us. We will see you next week. Oh, I ran a little late. So let me turn this off so we can finish a couple things in here. And if you have any questions, send them to me as always.